Arab nation, including Iraq, insists that it be treated in a dignified manner, saying at one point, we are a proud nation and we are fed up with treatment that we have endured in the past.
Okay. There was also no indication that what had been talked about as another European initiative, he seemed to shoot that down as well. There'd been talk of a meeting perhaps in Algeria between the Europeans and some Iraqi diplomats.
That's right. Earlier reports suggested that had been agreed to, that he would meet with them. But just now, Tariq Aziz said, no, his original proposal stands, and that is that the European community should send representatives to Baghdad, which is something the EC has rejected in the past.
So far. There was also a long and obviously deeply felt statement about what they thought were double standards and about the crisis that had been visited upon them for decades in the Middle East and the wars that they had suffered and the injustices that had happened to the Arab nation. There was no reference, perhaps for obvious reasons, but it perhaps should be pointed out that 10 years of that war was a war initiated by Iraq against its neighbor Iran, and nor was there, in all of his statements about the brotherhood of the Arab nation and those who genuinely support Iraq, the statement that Iraq had invaded its Arab brother and Arab neighbor, Kuwait, just to the south, a virtually militarily defenseless nation, and had annexed it. And when asked about that, he said, well, you have your standards and we have ours. Was quite a different point of view there.
He made 2 points on this question of double standards. One was that UN resolutions on the occupied territories have also been passed, and no one is insisting that they be implemented, so why insist only on the resolutions affecting the Persian Gulf crisis? And secondly, why does the world insist that Iraq get rid of its nuclear weapons and not make the same demand on Israel? So on those 2 questions, he argued quite forcefully that there is a double standard.
And now we're ready to go to the White House and to President George Bush.
I have a brief opening statement, and then I will take a few questions. I've spoken with the Secretary of State, Jim Baker, who reported to me on his nearly 7 hours of conversation with the Iraqi Foreign Minister, Tariq Aziz. Secretary Baker made it clear that he discerned no evidence whatsoever that Iraq was willing to comply with the international community's demand to withdraw from Kuwait and comply with the United Nations resolutions. Secretary Baker also reported to me that the Iraqi foreign minister rejected my letter to Saddam Hussein, refused to carry this letter and give it to the president of Iraq. The Iraqi ambassador here in Washington did the same thing. This is but one more example that the Iraqi government is not interested in direct communications designed to settle the Persian Gulf situation. The record shows that whether the diplomacy is initiated by the United States, the United Nations, the Arab League, or the European community, the results are the same, unfortunately. The conclusion is clear. Saddam Hussein continues to reject a diplomatic solution. I sent Secretary Jim Baker to Geneva not to negotiate but to communicate. And I wanted Iraqi leaders to know just how determined we are that the Iraqi forces leave Kuwait without condition or further delay. Secretary Baker made clear that by its full compliance with the 12 relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions, Iraq would gain the opportunity to rejoin the international community. And he also made clear how much Iraq stands to lose if it does not comply. Let me emphasize that I have not given up on a peaceful outcome. It's not too late. I've just been on the phone subsequent to the Baker press conference with King Fahad, with President Mitterrand, to whom I've talked twice today. Prime Minister Mulrooney and others are contacting other coalition partners to keep the matter under lively discussion. It isn't too late. But now, that as it's been before, the choice of peace or war is really Saddam Hussein's to make. And now I'd be glad to take a few questions.
Mr. President?
Yeah, Terry.
Hey, you said in an interview last month that you believe in your gut that Saddam Hussein would withdraw from Kuwait by January 15th. After the failure of this meeting today, what does your gut tell you about that? And in your gut, do you believe that there's going to be war or peace?
I can't misrepresent this to the American people. I am discouraged. I watched much of the Aziz press conference, and there was no discussion of withdrawal from Kuwait. The United Nations resolutions are about the aggression against Kuwait. They are about the invasion of Kuwait, about the liquidation of a lot of the people in Kuwait. It's about the restoration of the legitimate government to Kuwait. And here we were listening to a 45-minute press conference after the Secretary of State of the United States had a 6 hours worth of meetings over there, and there was not one single sentence that has to relate to their willingness to get out of Kuwait. And so, Terry, I'd have to say I certainly am not encouraged by that, but I'm not going to give up. And I told this to our coalition partners, and I'll be talking to more of them when I finish here. We've got to keep trying. But this was a total stiff arm. This was a total rebuff.
Let me follow up.
Yeah.
Let me follow up. Have you decided in your mind to go to war if he's not out of there by the 15th?
I have not made up my decision on what and when to do. I am more determined than ever that the United Nations resolutions, including 678, is implemented fully. Yes, Helen.
President Aziz made a pledge that he would not make the first attack. Would you match that? And also, what's wrong with a Middle East conference if it could avoid a bloody war?
No, I wouldn't make it, and we oppose linkage. The coalition opposes linkage, and the argument with Saddam Hussein is about Kuwait. It is about the invasion of Kuwait, the liquidation of a member of the United Nations, a member of the Arab League. And it has long been determined by not just the Security Council, but by the entire United Nations that this is about Kuwait. And that is the point that was missing from his explanations here today. And so there will be no linkage on these items, and that's been the firm position of all of the allies, those with forces there, and indeed of the United Nations, the General Assembly. So when he talked about his allies there, I don't know who stood up at the General Assembly of the United Nations and stood against the resolution that so overwhelmingly passed condemning Iraq. So there will be no linkage, put it that way. Yeah, Brett.
Tariq Aziz, on the subject of the letter, suggested that it was rude in its use of language and somehow inappropriate to a diplomatic communication. I wonder, sir, if you were willing to release the letter now that it has been run its course, apparently, and if whether you are or not, would you characterize it for us and tell us what it said?
Well, let me first describe why I wanted to send a letter. It has been alleged, fairly or unfairly, that those around Saddam Hussein refused to bring him bad news or refused to tell it to him straight. And so I made the determination that I would write a letter that would explain as clearly and forcefully as I could exactly what the situation is that he faces. The letter was not rude. The letter was direct, and the letter did exactly what I think is necessary at this stage. But to refuse to even pass a letter along seems to me to be just one more manifestation of the stonewalling that has taken place. We gave him 15 dates for the Secretary of State to meet with him. And he's off meeting with Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C, and has no time for that. So the letter was proper. I've been around the diplomatic track for a long time. The letter was proper, it was direct, and it was what I think would have been helpful to him to show him the resolve of the rest of the world, certainly of the coalition. In terms of releasing it, Britt, I haven't given much thought to that. It was written as a letter to him, but let me think about it. I might be willing to do it. I might not. I just don't know. If I thought it would help get the message out to him and through an indirect way, maybe it makes some sense, although we've been saying essentially the same thing over and over again that was in the letter.
Mr. President, was the refusal by the ambassador here to even accept the letter, was that prior to or simultaneous with the refusal of Tariq Aziz? I mean, is it your impression?
I think it was after he had made that. I think it was after the letter had been rejected at the table there in Geneva. It was just one more effort to try to get this direct communication to him, yes. Not sure on that, but I believe that's correct. Yes, it is correct.
Mr. President, there are reports that you are considering a call-up of up to 1 million reservists to reinforce the forces that are serving in the Persian Gulf. What can you tell us about that?
I can tell you nobody's ever suggested that to me.
Is there any reserve call-up being contemplated?
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll ask the Secretary of Defense to respond to that question when I get finished here.
Mr. President, can you tell us what your attitude now is about the use of force resolution that you asked for yesterday with the Congress?
Well, I had a good meeting with certain members of Congress. I've talked to all 4 leaders this afternoon, Senator Mitchell, Senator Dole, Speaker Foley, Congressman Michael. I talked to him in person here, and I'm not sure where it stands. I am anxious to see and would certainly welcome a resolution that says we are going to implement the United Nations resolutions to a T. I don't think it's too late to send a consolidated signal to Saddam Hussein. And I think that would be a consolidated signal. I think it would be helpful still. I've told the congressman back in December, as I think I told everyone in this room, that I would have welcomed a resolution back then, provided it would send this solid signal. But if it can do it today, I would welcome it. So I don't know exactly where it stands, but I know that there is a good feeling up there. I think people see that the American people are supportive of the policy of this country. I think they see that we have tried the diplomatic track. I hope they know that I am as committed to peace as anyone, but I hope they also know that I am firmly determined to see that this aggression not stand. And I think they're backing me in that. So maybe that ingredient, which hasn't always been quite as clear as it is now, will help as this debate, proper debate, goes forward in the Congress.
Right. Constitutionally, sir, do you think you need such a resolution? And if you lose it, would you be bound by that?
I don't think I need it. I think Secretary Cheney expressed it very well the other day. There are different opinions on either side of this question, but Saddam Hussein should be under no question on this. I feel that I have the authority to fully implement the United Nations resolutions.
And on the question of being bound, the second part of that?
I still feel that I have the constitutional authority, many attorneys having so advised me.
Senator, I want to ask you about Francois Mitterrand, but why his question opens up a whole area that you ask. You talk about you don't want this to be another Vietnam.
It won't be another Vietnam.
Congress of the United States refuses to give you a resolution that refuses to even give you a Gulf of Tonkin type resolution. How can you go to war?
I don't think they're going to refuse.
Let me ask you about the Francois Mitterrand. You say the
There have
court...
been 200, I just repeat for the record, that there have been a lot of uses of force in our history and very few declarations of war. But I have tried. I have done more consultation with the Congress than any other president. Some of these Democratic members have told me that. And I have tried to reach out to them in various ways, and I will continue to do it because I want to see a solid front here as we stand up against this aggressor.
Let me ask you about that solid front.
And I think it enhances the peace. I really believe, John, that he is living under a delusion. I think he doesn't think that force will be used against him. I think he's misinterpreted the debate. I also think he's under a delusion about what would happen if a conflagration breaks out. I believe that firmly, and I've had many, many people whom I respect tell me that. So I would hope that what we're talking about here would dissuade him from that. Oh, yeah.
Well, yes,
Just a follow-up.
You said that the coalition is united against any Muslim in the Palestinian question. You've talked to Francois Mitterrand twice today, but in public, he says he is for this international peace conference, and he seems to have no objection at all that Saddam Hussein wants to use that as a fig leaf to pull out of Kuwait. You do have an objection. Mitterrand also says that apparently the European community foreign ministers are going to meet with Aziz apparently in Algiers. What if they go in there and say, well, we have no objection to an international peace conference on the Mideast?
The foreign ministers of the EC have been very solid, and so has President Francois Mitterrand, that there will be no leakage. So you're asking me a hypothetical question that I won't have to answer, because he's not going to do that. The French government and the United States government over the years have had some differences in how the best way to bring peace to the Middle East is. We had a very active initiative underway by Jim Baker, but that doesn't have anything to do with the invasion of Kuwait. And Francois Mitterrand knows that it doesn't have to do with the invasion of Kuwait and the aggression against Kuwait. And I know he knows this, and he's been very forthright about it. But yes, he's very frank in saying countries have a different approach to how you solve another very important problem. And I would simply refer you back to what I've said on that subject. I think you were with us over in the joint press conference with President Gorbachev when I addressed myself to this. So, but I am going to avoid linkage. I listened to that Aziz meeting, and all he tried to do is obfuscate, to confuse, to make everybody think this had to do with the West Bank, for example. And it doesn't. It has to do with the aggression against Kuwait, the invasion of Kuwait, the brutalizing of the people in Kuwait. And it has to do with a new world order. And that world order is only going to be enhanced if this newly activated peacekeeping function of the United Nations proves to be effective. That is the only way the new world order will be enhanced. Yeah.
You say that Saddam Hussein doesn't understand yet. Why not a meeting face-to-face? Why refuse any meeting face-to-face?
Because he's had every opportunity. And he keeps stiff arm. We finally said, this is the last step. We tried 15 dates in Baghdad. We tried to set up these meetings. And now we tried this one, and there wasn't one single reason to make me think that another meeting between the United States and Saddam Hussein would do, and the Iraqis would do any good at all. If I felt it would, fine, but it will not. I talked to the Secretary General of the United Nations today, and there is a chance that he might undertake such a mission. Certainly we'd have no objection. There's one other reason, and I cite that, because this is not Iraq against the United States. It is Iraq against the rest of the world. It is the United Nations that passed 12 resolutions, not the United States. It is the General Assembly of the United Nations, 100+ countries standing solidly against the dictator. And therefore, it doesn't need to be a bilateral negotiation here. We tried that. And we were stiff-armed by an intransigent foreign secretary. And so the answer is, if diplomacy can be effective now, let's keep it in the context in which these resolutions were passed. And I would hope that maybe it would have an effect, but I'd have to level with the American people. Nothing I saw today, nothing, leads me to believe that this man is going to be reasonable. So back to Terry's question, I have less of a feeling that he'll come around, but we ought to keep trying. We ought to keep trying right down to the wire. Yeah.
Final question.
You repeated the keep trying, and you've cited the Secretary General of the United Nations. Secretary of State Baker cited him 3 times. What exactly could his mission be if there is no alternative to what Secretary Baker
I'm not sure. Maybe the whole, what would a mission of Jim Baker have been It might have been to convince the man that he is up against an immovable force. He is up against something that is not going to yield. He is up against a situation under which there will be no compromise, and there will be none. But because you see, and I go back to my point, I don't think he has felt this up till now. On both points, I don't think he's felt that the force will be used against him, and I think he has felt that if it were, he'd prevail. And he's wrong on both counts. Yeah.
Mr. President, there have been reports that Saddam believes that if it comes to war, even if he's driven out of Kuwait militarily, he can survive in power. Is he wrong?
I think he's wrong on all of his assumptions about what would happen if it came to war, God forbid. In the middle and back here, and then we got 3 more, and then I got to go. These.
Would he be killed, Mr. President?
Huh?
Would he be killed?
I'm not going to answer that. I don't know the answer to that question.
Mr. President, you seem to have ruled out further diplomacy as a...
No, you missed what I said, ma'am, Ellen, about the Secretary General, possibly. The EC has tried. I'll get back to you. Let me finish this one train of thought, and then I'll come to your question. The EC has tried, and indeed, we see Aziz saying no, he wouldn't meet with the foreign ministers. You've seen President Chadli Benjedid of Algeria to try. I told the congressman, I want to see us go the last step for peace. I want to use everything at my power to encourage people to try. And indeed, there have been. Arab League has tried. Over and over again, people have tried. And they come run up against the same answer. I remember the speculation that came out here in our papers in this country about a visit by a French delegate that was going over there. The hopes were raised. Nothing happened. So I just had to argue with the premise because there has been a lot of diplomacy and there may be more. Now, excuse me for interrupting you.
Sir, you seem to be very skeptical that further diplomacy would work, and yet you said here today that you haven't given up on a peaceful solution. I wonder where it is you find this hope for a peaceful solution.
I'm not sure I have great hope for it, but I think when human life is at stake, you go the extra mile for peace, and that's what we have tried to do. And I'll continue to think of reasons. I told President Mitterrand, I said, look, if you think of a new approach, or I do, please, let's one or the other get on the phone and try. But we remain determined that these resolutions are going to be complied with. I am very concerned that sanctions, I know sanctions alone aren't going to get this job done, and so we're pushing here, and that's what the Baker meeting with Aziz was about. I'm not going to give up, though. Karen?
Yeah, a lot of people in looking at this situation on the outside will say, there must be more than this. There must be some back-channel diplomacy. There must be something going on. We can't be rushing headlong into war this way. Can you tell us that there is nothing, that it is what we appear to be getting, that if Saddam isn't going to move, then we're going to war?
I'm not going to use that phrase. I am going to say if Saddam doesn't move, we are going to fully implement Resolution 678, and it'll be fully complied with. But I wish I could tell you I'm more hopeful. There is no back channel. We've tried it directly. I've had to level, and properly so, with our coalition partners as to what I'm doing, and they've leveled with us. Leveled with the United Nations Security Council members who are not involved in the coalition with force, for example, the Soviets. And a lot of avenues have been tried, but I can't tell you that there's any hidden agenda out there, secret negotiations. There is not. And it wouldn't be right for us to be off telling you one thing openly here and then going around behind the corner with some secret channel. So I would like to say if there's any feeling that that's happening, it isn't happening.
The entire hope for peace then rests on Saddam backing off from his current...
And it has since August 2nd, exactly, because this aggression is not going to stand. And there's an awful lot at stake in terms of the New World Order that it doesn't stand. And there's a lot at stake in terms of a lot of human life in Kuwait that it doesn't stand. And there's a lot at stake in terms of how the coalition looks at this that it doesn't stand. So it won't, yeah. And Charles, and then I gotta go.
You said when you first proposed high-level talks between Iraq and the United States that it was because... That it was because you were convinced the message had not gotten through, had not gotten across. Are you now convinced that the message has gotten across?
Well, I did listen carefully to Mr. Aziz, and who I thought spoke quite well. Didn't agree with what he's trying to do, obviously, to confuse the issue by refusing to discuss the point at hand, which is the invasion of Kuwait. But I thought he did it well, and I thought he kind of sent a signal that they do understand what's up against him, but I still don't believe that they think the world coalition will use force against him. I may be wrong, but that's what I think in here. And I also still believe, as I said earlier, that he somehow has this feeling that he will prevail, or that he will prolong. This will not be that. I've heard some wild predictions on this horrible human equation that might be involved if force were used, and I would say I don't agree with the some who are arguing the loudest, because putting the worst case out in terms of loss of human life. I must say that, but I don't know. I think Aziz understands it, but I'm not sure that Saddam Hussein does.
Mr. President,
A follow-up question. I'm sorry, I'm going to have one more, and then Charles, I told him, and then I'm leaving. Thank you very much, though. I'm off this.
If I may follow, when you were listening to Foreign Secretary Aziz, did you get any kind of particular feelings of anger or?
No, I didn't. I thought it was a very rational presentation, but wrong. And I thought I must say, I thought his style was good. From talking to Jim Baker, I thought when I talked to Jim, he said, look, the man presented his case. Clearly we didn't agree with it. I thought he was quite complimentary of the way the Secretary of State did it. So the atmospherics, I think, were all right, but he doesn't have it. He doesn't understand it, at least from what he said he doesn't, because this is not about some other question of linkage. This is about the invasion and the aggression about Kuwait, the dismantling of Kuwait, the brutality about Kuwait. And so I didn't get a sense of security from listening to that, but I will say that I thought that he presented his views in a reasonable way. He had a tough agenda. He had some tough talking points there. He works for a tough man. Yeah.
Mr. President, what exactly are you trying to convey here to Saddam Hussein on what he does have to lose? Is it the decimation of his society? Is it the liquidation of his military? Is it losing his own power? Can you be specific on that?
I can't be more specific, but I can be that he will get out of Kuwait, and he will get out of Kuwait entirely, and he will get out of Kuwait without concession. That, I think, is the underlying part of the message. Yeah, Charles.
Mr. President, the question of Israel. Tariq Aziz was emphatic that if Iraq is attacked, Israel will be attacked. What are your obligations to Israel? Are you prepared to fight a war throughout the Middle East?
That is too hypothetical a question for me to answer. We are prepared to do what we need to do to implicate, to fully implement 678. And I would think that he'd think long and hard before he started yet another war. There is one war on. That's his war against Kuwait. That's his aggression against Kuwait. And I don't think he wants to start another one, so I'm not going to buy into that hypothesis, but the United States would obviously feel that that was a most provocative act. Most provocative.
If I may, I don't believe it was a hypothetical question. The question was, what are your obligations to Israel?
We have friends all over the world. We have friends in this coalition, and I'm determined that the United States fulfill our obligations there. And clearly, if a friend in that area was attacked, wantonly attacked, for no cause whatsoever, not only the United States, but I think many people around the world would view that as a flagrant provocation. And I'll leave it stand right there. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Secretary Cheney, will you come and answer the question?
Another depressing evaluation of the situation from President Bush. This time now, Secretary Cheney is at the podium.
This is a test. The question was on possible additional reserve call-up authority. Under the authority that we're currently using, I'm authorized by a delegation from the President to use call up to 200,000 reservists for up to 180 days. That authority for some of those reservists who have been called begins to expire in February. And so what we currently have in the works is a provision that would use a different provision of the statute that would allow us to keep reservists on active service for as long as 2 years, and to call under that provision up to 1 million additional reservists. We have no intention of calling 1 million reservists, but that's the provision that's available for me to be able to extend those people in critical skills whose services are now being utilized and whom we would like to keep for this period of time, so we don't have to release them immediately back to reserve status. Thank you all very much.
And now Secretary of Defense Cheney leaves the White House press room, and the news conferences of the day are apparently over. President Bush, while appreciating the tone used by Tariq Aziz, said that his response amounted to a total stiff arm, a total rebuff, another manifestation of the stonewalling. He was disappointed. He was said he did not hold out any great hope of diplomatic resolution before January 15th, though he said we have to keep trying. He specifically, again, mentioned Javier Perez de Cuellar as a possible envoy to Baghdad. But again, when asked what his mission would be to Baghdad, he said, I don't know what his mission to Baghdad would be, and that he said that Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi leadership apparently does not understand the situation, doesn't get it. It's not about the West Bank, he said, it's about Kuwait. I'm still in the studio with NPR's Ted Clark. And Ted, what did you hear in that where does this take us?
Well, as you just pointed out, the president is rather discouraged. He said he indicated that he's somewhat more discouraged than he was when he gave an interview a week or so ago, and at that point said in his gut he thought Saddam Hussein would eventually come around. He said he doesn't feel quite so confident that that will happen now. Nevertheless, as you point out, he is not giving up. But he said that Saddam Hussein has rejected so many peace efforts, so many initiatives. He said whether it's the United Nations, the United States, the Arab League, or the European community, the results have always been the same. Iraq has rejected the initiatives. He defended the letter that he wrote to Saddam Hussein, which Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz refused to accept. Mr. Aziz claiming that the letter was rude and not worthy of the level of discourse that should occur between heads of state. President Bush said the letter was not rude, it was direct, and it was proper. And to refuse even to accept that letter, said President Bush, is another indication of Iraq's stonewalling.
Mm-hmm. He also pointed out that Iraq has apparently, at least Minister Aziz had apparently rejected this meeting with European foreign ministers in Algiers, which does not leave a great deal of room, except for perhaps this reported, well, obviously something's in the works with Perez de Cuellar. I think we can go beyond reported. President Bush said he'd spoken with him on the phone today, and I think we can expect a plane to be leaving for Baghdad from New York fairly shortly. Though he was asked several times, essentially the question, does this mean war? President Bush would not answer that directly, though he did say at one point, I know sanctions alone will not get the job done. And that an apparent answer to congressional critics who've said, why not wait, let the sanctions work, let the sanctions at least weaken Iraqi resolve. That the president's response, some of his other remarks appeared to be addressed to Congress.
That's right. He again appealed to Congress to basically pass a resolution authorizing the use of force along the lines of the resolution that the United Nations Security Council passed last year. And he said it's not too late to send a signal of resolve to Iraq, that even though the UN deadline is only 6 days away, this would not be too late for the U.S. Congress to get solidly behind the agenda that the President has in terms of bringing this problem in the Persian Gulf to a conclusion.
Yeah, but he also said that should a resolution not be passed, he doesn't need it. Should Congress pass a resolution opposing the use of force, he said he still felt he had the authority and was told by constitutional scholars that he still had the authority to go ahead with to implement the UN resolution. As he put it, he never used the phrase, he said he would not phrase it that way, he would not use the phrase to go to war, but rather to implement Resolution 678, the UN resolution.
But clearly, he would rather have the vote of Congress than not.
And clearly would not be very happy to have a vote opposing him at all. Before we leave you, let's recap briefly. If this was, as Secretary Baker said, the last best chance for peace, it has passed. It has been lost. The meeting today in Geneva between Secretary Baker and Foreign Minister Aziz was a failure. Both men came out, told news conferences in Geneva that they could not reach any meeting of the minds, and that while the tone was appropriate, there was no agreement whatsoever. Tariq Aziz refused to accept a letter that President Bush had written and asked to be delivered to Saddam Hussein. He refused to accept it. A copy in Arabic delivered to the Iraqi embassy here in Washington was similarly refused. Where we stand next is presumably to watch as a peace mission to Baghdad. It is undertaken by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Javier Perez de Cuellar, but the clock is most definitely ticking on what is appearing to be a more and more ominous deadline. You've been listening to a special program, news conference by Secretary of State James Baker, followed by a news conference by Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz, followed by a news conference by President George Bush at the White House. Engineers for this broadcast were Rich Rary, Andy Rosenberg, and Michael Cullen. Producers, Jeff Rosenberg and John Agulnik. Thanks to NPR's Richard Gonzalez and to NPR's Ted Clark, who's joined me here in the studio. I'm Neil Conan in Washington.
I'm Lisa Mullins. This is 90.9 WBUR Boston. You can hear details of the meeting between Secretary of State Baker and Foreign Minister Aziz and analysis of what may happen next as the Gulf situation intensifies. That's coming up on All Things Considered today starting at 5 o'clock. And we have a news update just coming up a minute from now on WBUR. Let's take a check on the afternoon commute with Joe Good.
And Lisa, just clearing that rollover accident, Route 24 northbound by 139 in Stoughton. It's over to the right-hand side, but the damage has been done. Some very slick roadways in there, and both directions, both north and southbound, all tied up as a result of that accident. Downtown traffic starting to build. The expressway southbound, stop and go down to the Dorchester gas tanks. The artery northbound is all tied up the entire stretch. Joe Good for Metro Traffic Control.
We're funded by our contributing listeners with additional support from the Cancer Center of Boston, providing comprehensive cancer treatment from professionals committed to patient care and new therapies. Bull Worldwide Information Systems, unleashing the power of computers for customers on 5 continents. And from KCSNA Public Relations, New York, New England, D.C., L.A., and Paris, providing marketing communications for newsmakers. In the forecast, sloppy weather into the evening. Look for sleet and freezing rain, especially away from the coast. Temperatures falling to the teens and low 20s overnight. For tomorrow, the sun will shine, but it's going to be on the chilly side. A cold wind, high temperatures only about 30 degrees. Cloudy on Friday with a chance of some snow flurries later on in the day. 29 degrees now in the Boston area. The time is 4:30. A news update is coming up next here at 90.9 WBUR, Boston's NPR news station.
From National Public Radio News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Secretary of State James Baker and Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz met for 6 hours today in a last effort to reach a solution to the Persian Gulf crisis. Baker says he heard nothing that suggested any Iraqi flexibility on the situation. Aziz says the United States is wrong when it charges that Baghdad has miscalculated in its occupation of Kuwait. Aziz also reiterated Iraq's position that if attacked, Baghdad will fire upon Israel. Baker says that perhaps the United Nations Secretary General may be able to reach a solution now that dialogue between the U.S. and Iraq has failed. President Bush told reporters this afternoon he still thinks there's room for more diplomacy in the Gulf crisis, but he fears that Saddam Hussein isn't interested in a negotiated solution to the crisis. The president cited as evidence Foreign Minister Aziz's refusal to pass along a letter to the Iraqi president. Mr. Bush says he used the letter to clearly and forcefully explain the situation Iraq faces if it does not withdraw from Kuwait.
The letter was proper. I've been around the diplomatic track for a long time. The letter was proper, it was direct, and it was what I think would have been helpful to him to show him the resolve of the rest of the world, certainly of the coalition.
President Bush also reiterated his opposition to any linkage between the Gulf crisis and the Palestinian issue. The 5 remaining United States diplomats in Baghdad will leave there this Saturday, according to Secretary Baker. He says Iraqi authorities have assured him the diplomats are free to leave. Jordan is closing its border with Iraq amid fear that it may have to cope with another wave of refugees. Hugh Schofield of the BBC has more from Amman.
United Nations officials here have warned that in the event of a war, there might be as many as 2 million people trying to leave Iraq. And because of the good name Jordan won in coping with the original wave of refugees last August, it'll probably be to Jordan that most of them will turn. For several weeks now, the UN and other agencies have been working hard to refurbish the camps set up last year. And they believe that by next week, they should have the capacity to shelter up to 100,000 refugees. But with anything above that, they say they simply won't be able to manage. It's in fear of this that the Jordanians have taken the decision to close their border with Iraq, to make sure there won't be another mass exodus in the event of or in the run-up to a war. The government says it'll only reconsider opening the border once there's a clear commitment from the rest of the world to finance the feeding, sheltering and repatriation of the refugees.
Hugh Schofield in Amman. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak is warning Baghdad that force by the multinational military gathered in the Persian Gulf will destroy Iraq. On Wall Street, stock prices closed lower today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 39 points to 2470.30. Declines led advances by 3-2 in very heavy trading. This is NPR News.
In North America, and she is also